Everybody loves to say that Indiana wins. Lower taxes, more house, end of story. But here's the problem with that take. Indiana is not one thing, and St. John is where that argument really gets tested. Because once you stop looking at bargain Indiana and start looking at premium Indiana, the value gap gets a lot less automatic. So today I want to answer a real buyer question. Is St. John still worth it once you compare it to realistic Illinois alternatives? If you saw my last video where I compared what $350,000 buys in Illinois versus Indiana, you already know why this matters. This video blew up because people were not just arguing about which state is better. They were reacting to the monthly difference, especially property taxes. A lot of you also brought up something important in the comments. You said Indiana is not one thing. St. John is not Maryville. St. John is not Cedar Lake. St. John is not every town rolled into one. And you were right. So this video is not just Indiana versus Illinois again. This is a more specific question. When Indiana stops being the cheap option, does it still make sense? Now before we get into the houses, let's frame this the right way. This is not a political rant. This is not me saying that taxes buy nothing. This is not me saying Illinois is bad and Indiana is automatically good. This is a buyer decision video because yes, taxes matter a lot, but so does commute, train access, daily convenience, the feel of the town, the services, and just what kind of life you want. So what I'm really looking at is what you pay versus what you get and what kind of trade-off you're going to make. And the biggest emotional center here is still the same as last time. The tax burden can change the monthly feel of the house in a big way. So let's start off with a cleaner St. John example. We're first going to talk about a home off Millard Drive. Here is why people get drawn to St. John in the first place. This house was listed at basically $500,000, and for that, you're getting a detached ranch over 2,100 square feet, 3-car garage, a decent lot, there's no HOA, and the taxes of only $3,700 a year. That tax number is what makes people stop and think. Because on a house around $500,000, that still feels light compared to what a lot of Illinois buyers are used to seeing. And because this is the kind of property that supports the Indiana argument, not because it's cheap, but because it still feels like a lot of house without the same tax drag. So if somebody says, well, why do people even look at St. John? This is why. But now let's show the other side of the argument, because once you compare it to Illinois houses in the same conversation, this is where things get a lot more interesting. We're going to jump over to a home off Cornell Drive in New Lenox. This is where the Illinois tax conversation is definitely going to be a focus. This house in New Lenox was listed at around $455,000. So right away, the price is not wildly different from the St. John example. It is not a weaker house either. You've got 4 bedrooms, over 2,100 square feet, there's no HOA, it's a corner lot, and a lot of the features that make it a totally legitimate suburban option. But then you look at the taxes. Over $11,000 a year. That's about $941 a month just in property taxes. And that is the part that really messes with people's monthly budgets. Because now the question is not just which house do I like better, it becomes how much more am I willing to carry every single month just because I chose this side of the border. That is why tax comments took over the last video, because it's not abstract. This changes affordability in a real way. Now, to be fair, this is also where people push back and say, yeah, but Illinois offers things too, and that is fair. So let's use a better Illinois example than just the tax shock example. This brings us to a home off Denny Avenue, also in Mokena. This one is much more balanced Illinois case. It was listed at $450,000, so again, right in the same general conversation. And here you're getting over 2,100 square feet, finished basement, a lot of recent updates, there's no HOA, and one feature that matters a lot for some buyers. You are a short walk to the train. If your work, your routine, or your lifestyle is tied more closely to Illinois, then the conversation is not just about taxes anymore. Of course, it becomes commute, convenience, access, and what your day-to-day life actually looks like. The taxes here are still not low. They are a little over $8,100 a year, or about $682 a month. So yes, still meaningfully higher than the St. John example. This is the real trade-off. Let's go one step further, because if you really want to test the St. John argument, you have to look at a true premium St. John house. Not just a decent one, a real premium one. This brings us to Marquette Street. This is where the story gets a little more real. This one closed at $520,000. So it's not just somebody testing a crazy list price. A buyer actually paid for this. And when you look at it, you can see why. It's a newer build, 4 bedrooms, 3-car garage, finished basement, a bigger lot, and there's no HOA. And taxes are still under $6,900 a year. That is about $571 a month in property taxes. Now, is that cheap? No, but that is exactly the point of this video. St. John at this level is not cheap Indiana. It's premium Indiana. And yet, even here, the tax picture can look pretty attractive compared to a lot of Illinois buyers' expectations. So this is the strongest argument for St. John. Even when you pay up, the overall carrying cost can still feel more reasonable than you would expect. But now we get to the real takeaway, because I don't think the conclusion here is that Indiana wins, case closed. I also do not think the conclusion is St. John is overrated. I think the real conclusion is more useful than that, because this is what I think this really shows. Cheap Indiana and premium Indiana are not the same conversation. Once you get into St. John, the story changes. The taxes may still look a little better, the house may still look strong, the monthly picture may still feel better than Illinois in some cases, but the gap's not automatic anymore. Because now you're paying for a more desirable Indiana town, newer or more premium housing stock. At the same time, Illinois still has real arguments. Some people work in Illinois. Commute matters. The train access matters. Services matter. And some buyers are okay paying more if the location fits their life better. And that's why I think some of the internet takes on this are too lazy. It is too simple to just say Indiana's cheaper. Cheaper where? Cheaper compared to what? And what are you giving up or gaining in return? That is the real conversation here. And I want to hit a few common pushbacks from the last video. Yes, Indiana still has state income tax, and yes, county income tax matters too. And there are other costs people brought up like groceries, registration, insurance, energy bills, and all that stuff. Those things also matter. But for most buyers, the biggest visible budget difference in a home purchase is still the housing payment itself, and property taxes are a huge part of that story. Also, I know some people say higher taxes can support stronger services or schools, and that is a fair point. So again, I'm not even saying higher taxes buy nothing. I'm saying buyers still have to decide whether that cost is worth it for their situation. And that is a different conversation, and it's just much more smart. So is premium St. John still worth it? I think the honest answer is sometimes yes, but it's not that Indiana automatically wins. It can still make a lot of sense if you want lower property taxes, you like the type of housing, and also the commute works for your life. But once you move into premium Indiana, the value gap gets smaller and the decision gets more personal. And that's really the point here. The closer you get to premium towns like St. John, the less this becomes a simple state war argument and the more it becomes a real buyer trade-off. And honestly, that's where things get interesting. If you want, drop a comment and tell me what town I should compare next. Would you still pick St. John? Would you take Mokena or New Lenox instead? And what matters more to you? Is it lower taxes, a better commute, or an overall lifestyle?